when my business partner leaned across the glossy conference table and said, "The deal is done. You're out." My chest tightened. 15 years of sweat, sacrifice, and missed family moments. Gone in a single sentence. He thought he had won. He thought I was broken. But what he didn't realize was that I knew every line of our contracts, every hidden clause, and every secret detail of our business. 2 weeks later, when he walked into his office to find the locks changed, his name erased, and his power gone, he finally understood the cost of betrayal. Before we continue, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if your own business partner sold the company you built behind your back? I still remember the smell of burnt coffee and stale carpet in that tiny office where my partner and I first started the company. We were nothing then. Just two men with borrowed laptops, a line of credit from the bank, and a dream we believed in more than sleep. I skipped anniversaries, birthdays, and my son's baseball games because we were grinding every hour we could find. He skipped nothing. Even back then, I noticed how he'd vanish for long lunches or leave early for some social event. But I told myself it didn't matter as long as the company survived. I was the one keeping the lights on, and he was the one charming people at dinners. Maybe it was a good balance. At least, that was the story I told myself. 15 years passed in a blur of contracts, clients, and late nights in boardrooms where I was the last one to leave. We built a name that mattered in the industry. Our company wasn't just surviving anymore. It was thriving. We had 50 employees, a headquarters in the city, and contracts lined up months in advance. I had given it everything I had, right down to a second mortgage on my house when we almost went under in year 3. I poured my life into that company, like it was a child. And in return, it was supposed to give me a future. But success changes people. I noticed it in him first. Expensive watches started appearing on his wrist, cars leased under the company's name, weekends in the Hamptons that somehow became business development trips. Meanwhile, I was wearing the same suits I had bought years earlier and patching leaks in my roof because every dollar I earned went back into keeping payroll secure and vendors paid. He became flashier, more arrogant, and less interested in the details that actually made the company function. I told myself not to resent it. I thought maybe he had earned the right to enjoy things. After all, we both started this together. The first real crack showed up one Thursday afternoon during a strategy meeting. He dismissed a junior staff member in front of everyone, cutting him down with a smirk that made the room shrink. That wasn't who he used to be. I saw unease in the eyes of our employees, but no one said anything. I didn't either. I just told myself I'd deal with him later, like I always did. But deep inside, a cold knot was forming. A month later, I walked past his office late at night. The lights were still on, but the door was cracked open. He was on the phone, pacing. I could hear his voice sharp and low, the kind of tone he only used when he didn't want anyone to know what he was up to. At first, I thought he was talking to a client. But then I caught the words. "Yes, the numbers are inflated for the presentation. They don't know. Once it's signed, he'll be out. He'll be out." I froze. My name wasn't mentioned, but I didn't need it to be. I was the only one standing between him and unchecked control. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, but my chest was burning as I stood there. I slipped away quietly before he noticed me, my mind racing. The next morning, I came in earlier than usual, and started combing through the shared drives and email logs. Most things were locked down under his personal accounts, but I knew where to look. After all, I built most of the systems myself back when we couldn't afford an IT team. And that was when I found it. a folder tucked into a directory named innocently as Budget Review Q3. Inside were contracts, non-disclosure agreements, and draft emails with subject lines that made my stomach turn. Acquisition terms, majority sale, exit deal timeline, pages and pages of numbers. And right there, buried in black and white, was a sales agreement between our company and an outside investment firm. The valuation was fair, higher than I'd expected even. But the line that shattered me was the ownership distribution. His name, next to 70% of the payout. Mine, barely listed at 30%. No mention of my years of sweat. No acknowledgement of the mortgages and sacrifices. No respect for the nights I worked alone while he was shaking hands over cocktails. He had quietly rewritten our history and positioned himself as the sole architect of our success. I leaned back in my chair and felt the walls of the office closing in. 15 years of loyalty had been erased in a set of documents that treated me like a footnote. It wasn't just money he was stealing. It was my life. My son once asked me why I worked so hard, why I missed his high school graduation. I told him it was for the future, that this company would secure everything for him, for us, for the family. And now I realized it was all a lie. I had been building a castle while he was quietly selling it from under me. I printed the documents, every single page, and stuffed them into a folder I could lock in my desk. My hands shook as the printer spat them out. Betrayal is not just an act. It is a punch to the chest that makes it hard to breathe. I had always imagined betrayal would come from a rival, a competitor, someone across the street trying to undercut our contracts. I never thought it would come from the man who once promised me we'd stand side by side until the end. That evening, I stayed late again. The office was quiet, empty except for the faint hum of the vending machine. I was staring at the folder of contracts, wondering how deep the damage went, when I heard footsteps behind me. His voice was casual, too casual, as he stepped into my doorway. "Big day tomorrow," he said, smirking. "We're meeting with the buyers. The deal is done. You're out." Just like that. No hesitation, no guilt. Just a statement dropped like a hammer on my chest. I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't ask questions. I didn't challenge him. I just nodded slowly, as if I had already accepted it. He grinned, mistaking my silence for defeat, and left the room. When the door clicked shut, I sat there in the glow of the desk lamp, my pulse pounding in my ears. He thought he had ended me tonight. He thought the papers in his folder would erase 15 years of my blood and sweat. But what he didn't know was that the story wasn't over. Because hidden in the very contracts he was so proud of was a clause he had forgotten. A clause I had buried in our founding agreement years ago. I had written it myself. And in that moment, staring at his shadow fading down the hall, I realized the war had just begun. He thought the deal was finished. He thought I was done. But I was holding one clause, one line of text, that could destroy everything he built. I could hardly sleep that night. His words kept replaying in my head. "The deal is done. You're out." For 15 years, I had sacrificed everything for this company, and now my so-called partner had decided I was disposable. He thought a few signatures and backroom conversations would erase me. What he didn't know was that I had been preparing for this kind of betrayal since the beginning. Back when we first formed the company, I insisted on drafting our partnership agreement myself. He laughed at me, said we could just download something off the internet and be fine. But I had lived long enough to know that people change when money comes into the picture. I didn't trust shortcuts when it came to protecting my future. So I wrote a contract that covered everything: ownership shares, decision-making powers, voting rights, and most importantly, one hidden clause that could not be bypassed without my signature. It was buried deep in the document, written in simple language so it wouldn't attract attention. At the time, I never even told him about it. I just watched him sign the paperwork without reading past the first 2 pages. That clause gave me veto power over any sale, merger, or acquisition. He could brag, he could scheme, he could even draft contracts and shake hands with investors. But without my approval, the deal wasn't legally binding. The next morning, I walked into the office calm on the outside, but my chest was pounding. He was in the conference room already, sleeves rolled up, grinning like he had finally won something. Papers were spread across the table, shiny new contracts with bold signatures already marked in blue ink. "You're late," he said, smirking as he pushed the papers toward me. "No need for you to sign anything. The deal is sealed. You'll get a payout, 30%. Generous, considering you've been slowing us down." Slowing us down. The words nearly made me choke. Did he think I'd forget the years I kept the business alive while he schmoozed? Did he forget I had mortgaged my house to keep us afloat in year 3? I bit my tongue and let him keep talking. He leaned back in his chair, oozing arrogance. "You should be grateful. I've lined up our future. These guys will take us to the next level, and frankly, I don't need dead weight anymore." I forced myself to smile. I even nodded. "I see." He mistook my composure for surrender, which was exactly what I wanted. "Good," he said, clapping his hands. "Let's toast to a new era." He poured 2 glasses of whiskey from the cabinet in the corner and slid one toward me. I lifted the glass, but didn't drink. He downed his in one swallow, clearly drunk on more than liquor. As he gloated, I studied the papers carefully. The numbers were large. The buyers were legitimate. The problem was not that the deal didn't exist. The problem was that he had forgotten the most crucial document of all, the one we signed 15 years ago. Without my signature, the ink on these new pages was nothing more than wasted paper. I excused myself after an hour of pretending to listen to his vision of a future where he was in charge, and I was gone. I went back to my office, locked the door, and pulled out the folder of old contracts I had kept hidden all these years. The clause was still there, crystal clear, waiting for me to use it. I ran my finger across the line that gave me full veto power. For the first time since discovering his betrayal, I felt the fear in my chest begin to ease. He thought I was finished. But the truth was, I had just been handed the perfect opportunity to turn his arrogance against him. That afternoon, I called a lawyer I trusted, one who had handled small matters for me in the past. I emailed him scans of the partnership agreement and the so-called sale contracts. Within an hour, he called me back, his voice steady but charged with energy. "He doesn't have a leg to stand on. That clause makes you indispensable. Without your approval, the sale is invalid." Hearing those words was like water to a man dying of thirst. My partner thought he had buried me, but all he had really done was light the fuse on his own destruction. The next day, I watched him strut around the office like a king. He bragged openly to a few senior employees, dropping hints about big changes coming soon. I could see confusion in their eyes, uncertainty about their jobs, about their futures. He loved the feeling of power, of dangling people's lives like toys in his hands. I kept my distance, letting him dig his own grave. That Friday, he invited the buyers to a dinner at a downtown steakhouse. The kind of place with leather booths, dim lighting, and bills big enough to cover a week's rent for most of our employees. He walked in wearing a tailored suit and a grin wide enough to split his face. I sat quietly at a separate table near the back, close enough to hear the conversation, but far enough to remain unnoticed. I watched him exaggerate numbers, talk about himself as the visionary who had carried the company from nothing to greatness. He never once mentioned my name. The buyers seemed impressed, nodding, smiling, clinking glasses with him. But as I listened, I noticed something else. He was promising them things he had no right to promise. Future contracts we hadn't won yet. Expansion plans I had never approved. Intellectual property that I personally held the rights to. He was selling lies wrapped in charm, and the buyers were eating it up. I left that dinner with my jaw tight, but my mind focused. I knew what I had to do. The clause was my shield, but it wasn't enough to just stop the sale. I needed to take back everything he had stolen, and I needed to do it in a way that would strip away his mask in front of everyone. That meant gathering evidence, lining up allies, and hitting him where it hurt most. His reputation. The following Monday, I started working behind the scenes. I spoke quietly with a few loyal employees, the ones who had been with us since the early days. I didn't reveal everything, not yet, but I planted enough seeds for them to know something was coming. Their trust gave me strength. For once, I wasn't alone in this fight. By Tuesday, my lawyer had drafted a formal notice invalidating the sale, citing the partnership clause in clear, sharp language. The paper was thick in my hands, heavy with justice. I could already picture his face when it landed in front of him. But I wasn't ready to play that card yet. Timing was everything. He needed to believe he had won, right up until the moment I pulled the rug out from under him. So I smiled when he passed me in the hallway, smiled when he bragged about the new era the company was about to enter, smiled when he told an intern that I was on my way out. He thought my silence meant defeat. What he didn't realize was that silence was strategy. Late one evening, as I locked up my office, I caught him in the lobby on the phone again. His voice was lower this time, sharper. "He won't fight it," he said. "He's weak. By next week, I'll be the sole owner. No one will even remember his name." I gripped the handle of my briefcase so hard my knuckles ached. His words weren't just arrogant. They were the final proof of what I already knew. He had declared war, and I wasn't about to lose. He thought I was weak. He thought I was finished. But I was holding the one document that could end him. After that night in the lobby, stopped feeling betrayed and started feeling focused. Pain was being replaced by purpose. I had the clause. I had the power. But power meant nothing if I used it too soon. If I slapped that document on the table right away, I'd stop the sale, yes. But he would slither away with excuses. He'd blame me, twist the story, make himself look like the visionary who was held back by a bitter partner. People might believe him. Clients might believe him. Employees might believe him. And then, even if I won on paper, I'd lose where it really mattered. His reputation had to fall. The first step was to gather everything I could use against him. Every lie, every inflated number, every document he had signed without authority. I started by going back through our emails, digging into the old archives that most people forget exist. I found a trail of promises he had made to the buyers, claims about future projects we didn't even have contracts for. I found letters where he guaranteed resources we didn't own. I found draft memos where he promised to cut dead-weight staff once the deal closed. The language was cold and clear. He was planning to gut the company the second the ink dried. Next, I turned to our finances. I had always been the one who cared about the books. He preferred to skim over the numbers, smiling at the big totals, but ignoring the cracks. That laziness was about to destroy him. Buried in the expense reports were charges he had tried to bury. Weekends in Aspen labeled as client retreats, thousands of dollars in jewelry disguised as employee gifts, and payments to a private account marked as consulting. Each one was a thread I could pull, and I knew that if I pulled hard enough, the whole fabric would unravel. But documents alone weren't enough. I needed people. I needed allies. So I started small. I spoke to Anna, our office manager, who had been with us since the beginning. She remembered when we worked out of a storage unit, and she knew exactly who had been doing the heavy lifting all these years. I showed her a few of the memos I found, the ones where he talked about cutting staff after the sale. Her face went pale. "He can't do this," she whispered. "Half of these people left stable jobs because they believed in you." That was exactly what I wanted her to remember. Not him, me. One by one, I spoke to others. A senior engineer who had spent nights sleeping at the office during a product launch. A designer who had turned down better offers because she believed in our culture. Quietly, carefully, I let them know the truth. The company wasn't safe in his hands. I didn't ask for their loyalty. I didn't need to. They gave it freely once they saw what he was planning. While I was building my army inside, my lawyer was building the case outside. We mapped out a timeline, a strategy. First, we'd invalidate the sale legally, cutting the legs out from under him. Then, we'd expose his financial fraud and lies to the very people he had promised the world to. Finally, we'd make sure every client, every employee, and every partner saw him for who he really was. My lawyer smiled when I finished laying it all out. "This isn't just defense," he said. "This is going on the attack." The final piece was timing. He had scheduled a grand dinner with the investors, a chance to celebrate the future, as he called it. It was to be held at a private club downtown, the kind of place that dripped with polished wood, fine wine, and expensive meals. He wanted to impress them, show them he was the genius behind everything, bask in their admiration. That was the night I chose to act. In the days leading up to it, I played the part of the beaten man. I nodded in the hallways, smiled faintly at his jabs, and let him believe I had surrendered. The more arrogant he became, the more blind he grew. He started bragging openly about his future, telling staff they should start adjusting to new leadership. He even called me retired in front of an intern. I let him laugh, let him feel untouchable. The more he climbed, the harder the fall would be. The night of the dinner, I arrived early. I wasn't invited, of course, but I didn't need an invitation. I walked in wearing the same suit I had worn the day we signed our first big client. Nothing flashy, nothing expensive. Just the fabric of a man who had worked and bled for 15 years. I slipped into a corner table, ordered a glass of water, and waited. When they came in, he was glowing. He shook hands, hugged shoulders, and guided the investors to their seats like he was already a king. The table filled with laughter, the kind of laughter money buys. But I watched the details. I watched how he leaned in too far, promising numbers that didn't exist. I watched how he avoided specifics when pressed, spinning stories instead of answers. The investors smiled politely, but I could see the cracks. They wanted proof, and he didn't have it. Halfway through the meal, I stood up. He didn't see me at first. It wasn't until the investor's eyes shifted that he turned and when he did, his grin faltered. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice steady but strong, "forgive me for intruding. I'm the other half of this company, the half he hasn't mentioned tonight." The room fell silent. Forks froze in midair. His face drained of color, then flushed deep red. "What are you doing here?" he hissed. But I ignored him and turned to the investors. "I know you've been promised big things, contracts, expansions, profits. What you haven't been told is that this deal is not valid. It cannot be valid without my approval. And I do not approve." The investors exchanged looks, confusion flickering into suspicion. I pulled a folder from my briefcase and placed it on the table. Inside were the original partnership documents, the clause highlighted clearly, impossible to ignore. "Any agreement made without my consent," I continued, "is nothing more than a fantasy." The room buzzed with whispers. One of the investors picked up the paper, reading quickly, his eyes narrowing. My partner lunged forward, his voice cracking. "He's lying. He's bitter. He's just trying to ruin this." But his desperation betrayed him. He was sweating now, tugging at his collar, stumbling over his words. I stood calmly, my hands steady. "I don't need to ruin this," I said quietly. "You did that yourself when you sold a company you didn't own." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. He looked around the table, but no one came to his rescue. His charm was gone, stripped away by the truth in black and white. I gathered my papers, nodded politely to the investors, and walked out. Behind me, I could hear voices rising, questions firing at him, his answers collapsing under the weight of his lies. That was the first strike. The deal was dead. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. The sale was dead. His lies were exposed. But this was only my first strike. And the real war was just beginning. The fallout from that dinner spread through the company faster than gossip ever could. By the next morning, whispers were running through every hallway, every desk cluster, every break room. The investors had backed away quietly, but word leaked that they were furious at being misled. My partner tried to control the narrative, telling people I had blindsided him, claiming I was desperate and bitter. But the cracks were showing, and his voice no longer carried the same weight. The staff who had always believed in me were starting to look at him differently. Anna, the office manager, came to me quietly with updates. "They're nervous," she said. "Everyone's realizing how many lies he's told." The dinner shook them. I nodded, listening carefully, but I kept my plans close. The time to reveal everything hadn't come yet. My lawyer and I worked late into the night, gathering evidence, lining up documents, and preparing the legal blow that would seal his fate. The clause had killed the sale, but that was only the beginning. We needed to show not just that he had broken the rules, but that he had betrayed everyone who ever trusted him. That meant pulling together financial records, contracts, and proof of his fraud. The evidence piled up quickly. The more we looked, the worse it became. Hidden accounts, inflated invoices, payments to shell companies that led back to his personal credit cards. He hadn't just been arrogant. He had been stealing for years. Every time he threw a lavish dinner or boasted about a new watch, I realized he had been funding it with money siphoned from the company we built together. But as satisfying as it was to gather the evidence, I wanted him to feel the walls closing in before the final blow. So I made sure the right people started asking the right questions. I left copies of certain expense reports where they would be found. I let slip to a few senior employees that auditors might be coming soon. The office buzzed with rumors, and every rumor chipped away at the confidence he once commanded. By the end of that week, he was snapping at people, slamming doors, and barking orders he didn't have the authority to give. He called me into his office one afternoon, slamming a stack of papers onto his desk. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he spat, sabotaging me, undermining me. I looked him straight in the eye. "I don't need to sabotage you. You did that yourself." His face turned red, veins bulging at his temples. For a second, I thought he might lunge across the desk. But then he leaned back, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You'll regret this," he said. "You think you've won, but you haven't seen what I'm capable of." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I simply stood and walked out, leaving him fuming behind his polished desk. That night, I stayed late in my office, sorting through another set of documents. The building was nearly empty, just the hum of the air system and the occasional creak of old pipes. I was deep in thought when I heard the elevator doors open downstairs. Footsteps echoed in the lobby, slow and deliberate. I frowned. It was past midnight. No one had a reason to be here. The footsteps grew louder, closer, climbing the stairs. My pulse quickened. Then, without knocking, my office door burst open. He stood there, eyes wild, tie loosened, the smell of whiskey thick on his breath. He slammed the doors shut behind him, his fists clenched at his sides. "You think you can humiliate me?" he shouted, his voice cracking with rage. "You think you can embarrass me in front of investors, in front of staff, in front of everyone?" He took a step closer, his face inches from mine. "I built this company. Me, not you. And I'll destroy you before I let you take it from me." His spit hit my cheek, but I didn't flinch. I just sat there, calm, steady, letting his fury burn itself out. When I finally spoke, my voice was quiet, controlled. "You already destroyed yourself. You just don't realize it yet." He froze, his chest heaving, his fists trembling. For a moment, silence hung between us, heavy as stone. Then he let out a bitter laugh and shook his head. "You think you're clever, but you don't know the half of it." He leaned in so close, I could smell the liquor seeping from his skin. "You cross me again, and you'll regret it. I promise you that." And then he was gone, slamming the door behind him so hard the glass rattled in its frame. I sat back in my chair, staring at the door, my heart beat loud in the empty room. I knew then that the game had changed. He wasn't just arrogant anymore. He was desperate. And desperate men are dangerous. I turned back to the folder of documents on my desk, my hands steady despite the storm he had just brought, into my office. The proof was there. Page after page of his theft, his lies, his betrayal. It was almost time to strike. But I needed one more moment, one perfect opportunity to make sure his downfall was absolute. He stormed into my office and swore I'd regret crossing him. But he didn't know. The very next move I made would ruin him forever. The morning after his drunken storm into my office, I knew the clock had started ticking. He was unraveling. The investors were gone, the staff was whispering, and his arrogance had turned into desperation. That was when my lawyer told me the timing was perfect. "We have everything we need," he said. "Financial fraud, unauthorized contracts, the partnership clause. If you want to end this, now is the moment." I didn't hesitate. For years I had carried this company on my back while he stole from the shadows. Now, finally, justice was within reach. My lawyer filed the lawsuit in county court. Breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of funds, fraud, and violation of the partnership agreement. It was a thick stack of claims, every page backed with evidence. Not speculation, not rumors. Proof. The kind that even the best lawyer money could buy couldn't explain away. But serving papers wasn't enough. I wanted everyone to see him for what he really was. The staff, the clients, the community. So I planned it carefully. The lawsuit would be delivered in public, where no whisper of denial could survive. If he had enjoyed humiliating me with his smug, "You're out" speech, then he would feel the same sting multiplied tenfold. Meanwhile, the staff's loyalty was already shifting. Anna, the office manager, told me people were uneasy. "He's snapping at everyone," she whispered. "He screams about loyalty, but no one believes him anymore. They know you're the reason we even have jobs." I could see it too. The same employees who once looked at him with admiration now avoided his gaze. They came to me quietly with questions, reassurances, sometimes even gratitude. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying this fight alone. Clients began to call me directly, bypassing him altogether. They wanted to know what was happening. They had heard rumors about a failed sale, about instability at the top. I reassured them calmly, telling them contracts would be honored and work would continue. I didn't mention his name. I didn't have to. They could read between the lines. The pressure was eating him alive. He started holding closed-door meetings with small groups, trying to rally loyalty. But every time he emerged, his face was redder, his voice sharper. He would storm through the office, barking orders that no one followed. I watched from my office as he tried to intimidate people with the same old tricks. It wasn't working anymore. The fear was gone. One afternoon, he barged into a staff meeting I was holding. His face was twisted with rage, his tie crooked, his shirt stained with sweat. "Don't listen to him," he shouted, pointing at me with a trembling finger. "He's finished. I'm in charge here." The room went silent. The employees looked at him, then at me. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. His meltdown said everything. He stormed out, slamming the door, leaving behind a room full of stunned faces. Anna broke the silence with a quiet but firm sentence. "We stand with you." That was the turning point. From then on, the office wasn't his kingdom anymore. It was mine again. The lawsuit moved fast. My lawyer filed motions to freeze certain accounts and protect company assets from being siphoned away. We submitted detailed exhibits showing his personal use of company funds. Thousands spent on vacations labeled as business trips. Jewelry purchased under corporate gifts. A new car leased in the company's name, but registered to his wife. It was damning, and it was airtight. Still, I didn't relax. I knew men like him. He would deny everything until the very end, and he would try to spin it as me being bitter or jealous. That was why the serving of papers had to be public. I wanted every single person in that building to see the truth land in his hands. No more whispers. No more lies. So I waited until Monday morning, the busiest day of the week. The lobby would be full, employees arriving, clients stopping by, the receptionist buzzing with phone calls. I arranged with the process server to meet me just before 9 o'clock. I stood in the lobby, pretending to review my phone, my heart steady. The staff gave me curious glances, sensing something was coming. Then the elevator doors opened, and there he was. He stepped out wearing his most expensive suit, his chin high, his arrogance still intact. He didn't notice me at first. He was too busy barking at the receptionist about some phone call he had missed. That was when the process server stepped forward, a calm man in a gray jacket holding a thick envelope. "Are you Mr. Taylor?" the server asked. My partner turned, confused. "Yes. Who are you?" The man handed him the envelope. "You've been served." The words echoed in the lobby. He froze, staring down at the packet in his hands. His face drained of color as he flipped it open, scanning the first page. Around us, the room grew silent. Employees stopped moving. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the phones seemed to pause their ringing. Everyone was watching. His lips moved silently as he read. Fraud, misappropriation, breach of duty, violation of partnership agreement. Each word seemed to cut deeper, and his hands began to shake. He looked up at me then, his eyes burning with hatred. But I didn't flinch. I stood calm, steady, letting the silence fill the space between us. The receptionist's eyes widened. Anna stood in the back, arms crossed, a small, knowing smile tugging at her lips. The staff began to whisper, one by one, like a wave of realization sweeping the room. He wasn't the king anymore. He was the fraud. He slammed the envelope shut and shouted, "This is nothing. Lies, all of it." But his voice cracked, too loud, too desperate. No one believed him. The whispers grew louder, the stares sharper. For the first time, he wasn't feared. He was pitied. I turned to the process server, nodded, and walked past him toward the elevators. My partner tried to block my path, but the envelope slipped from his hands, scattering papers across the polished floor. Employees bent to pick them up, scanning the bold accusations in black ink. There was no stopping it now. The truth was out. And as the doors closed behind me, I knew this was just the beginning of his collapse. The lawsuit was in his hands. The staff had seen everything. But I wasn't done yet. His public humiliation had only just begun. The day of the hearing arrived like a storm. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and dust, a place where secrets had nowhere to hide. My lawyer and I walked in together, files in hand, while my partner strutted in with his own attorney, trying to project confidence. He wore another one of his expensive suits, but his eyes betrayed him. They darted around the room, restless, unsure. For the first time in 15 years, he wasn't in control. The gallery was filled with faces from the company. Employees had taken time off to sit in the back row, curious, nervous, but eager to see the truth play out. Even a few clients showed up, their arms crossed, waiting for answers. He looked at them and smiled as if he still had their loyalty, but no one smiled back. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. What followed was hours of cold, clinical exposure. My lawyer presented the partnership agreement first, the clause that invalidated the sale. It was simple, clear, undeniable. Without my approval, the deal was worthless. The judge nodded as the language was read aloud, her eyes narrowing on my partner. His attorney tried to argue that it was outdated, that business had evolved since then, but the words on the page left no room for interpretation. The clause was ironclad. Then came the financial evidence. Page after page of expense reports, fraudulent invoices, and personal purchases disguised as business costs. My lawyer laid them out like daggers on the table. Weekends in Aspen, jewelry, a leased vehicle in his wife's name, all charged to the company, all paid for by employees' sweat and the plaintiff's sacrifice. My partner shifted in his chair, his face slick with sweat. He whispered furiously to his attorney, but it didn't matter. The documents were there, stamped, verified, undeniable. Each piece of evidence struck harder than the last. Then came the witnesses. Anna testified first. She spoke calmly, her voice steady as she described his arrogance, his outbursts, his threats to cut staff after the sale. The senior engineer followed, explaining how promises were made to clients that were impossible to keep. One by one, loyal employees stood and revealed what they had seen, what they had endured. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't exaggerated. It was raw truth, and the courtroom felt every word. When it was his turn to testify, he stumbled. He started with bravado, declaring that I had always been holding the company back, that I was bitter, jealous, incapable of leading. But under cross-examination, his story collapsed. My lawyer pushed him with numbers, with documents, with timelines he couldn't explain. His voice cracked. His answers grew shorter. At one point, the judge had to tell him to stop dodging questions and answer directly. He looked cornered, smaller than I had ever seen him. The breaking point came when the investors themselves testified. They admitted that he had promised them assets and contracts that didn't exist, that he had inflated numbers and guaranteed things without authority. One of them, a stern man in a gray suit, looked him in the eye and said, "You lied to us, and you expected us not to notice." The gallery murmured, the sound like a wave washing over him. His head dropped, shoulders slumped, his arrogance finally stripped away. By the end of the day, there was nothing left of his defense. The judge leaned forward, her voice firm but calm as she delivered her ruling. The attempted sale of the company is hereby declared invalid. The partnership agreement is binding and enforceable. Furthermore, evidence of financial misconduct will be referred for further investigation. The defendant is hereby ordered to forfeit control of company accounts, and the plaintiff will assume authority until further notice. The gavel struck. The sound echoed like thunder. It was done. I turned, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to breathe deeply. The employees in the gallery were smiling, nodding, some even whispering to each other with relief. My lawyer shook my hand, his grip firm. Justice had spoken. But when I looked at my former partner, I didn't see justice. I saw ruin. His face was pale, his lips pressed tight, his eyes hollow. The man who once walked into rooms like he owned the world now looked like he had been stripped bare. And he had. His reputation was gone, his lies exposed, his empire collapsing. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting, microphones shoved forward, questions flying. Is it true he stole money from the company? How much damage was done? Will there be criminal charges? I didn't answer directly. I simply said, "The truth is finally out, and the company will survive." He tried to push past the reporters, but the cameras caught every angle of his defeat. His tie was loose, his hair damp with sweat, his face twisted with rage and shame. The employees who had once feared him now stood tall beside me. He was alone in the crowd, and he knew it. That night, I walked back into the office. The staff was waiting, gathering, in the conference room. When I stepped inside, they rose to their feet, applauding softly at first, then louder. It wasn't the sound of victory. It was the sound of relief, of hope. I thanked them quietly, told them the worst was behind us. But deep inside, I knew it wasn't entirely over. Men like him don't vanish quietly. His pride wouldn't let him. He would come back one way or another, clawing, begging, maybe even threatening again. And I was right. Because just as I thought the dust was settling, a knock came on my office door. When I opened it, there he stood. Not in a suit this time, not with arrogance. His shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow. He looked like a man who had lost everything. He said only one sentence, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I need your help." The judge stripped him of everything. His empire was gone. But then he came to me and begged for help. He came into my office like a ghost. No polished suit, no practiced smirk, no shiny watch glinting in the light. just a broken man whose arrogance had finally collapsed under the weight of truth. His voice was hoarse, his shoulders bent as though the air itself pressed down on him. "I need your help," he said. For a long moment, I simply stared at him. This was the same man who once looked me in the eye and told me I was finished. The same man who whispered lies into phone calls while I worked late nights. The same man who tried to sell everything I had sacrificed for behind my back, as though I were nothing more than a footnote. And now, here he was, begging. I motioned for him to sit. He lowered himself into the chair across from me, his hands shaking so badly he had to press them together to keep them still. His eyes were red, his hair unkempt, his whole presence stripped of the swagger he had worn like armor for years. "They froze my accounts," he whispered. "The court took control of everything. My house, my cars, even the vacation place. They've repossessed them all. I'm ruined. You don't understand? I have nothing left." I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. "You don't understand," I said quietly. "You did this to yourself. Every lie, every dollar stolen, every time you looked me in the eye and thought I wouldn't notice. You built this collapse brick by brick." His voice cracked as he leaned forward. "I made mistakes, yes, but I can fix them. If you let me work with you, if you stand beside me, I can rebuild. People still respect you. You can open doors, just don't leave me in the gutter." For the first time in years, I saw tears in his eyes. And for a flicker of a second, the old part of me, the one who remembered late nights in the storage unit, cheap takeout dinners, and the thrill of our first client, wanted to feel pity. But that part of me had been killed the night I found the contracts he tried to hide. The night he stood in my doorway with that smug smile and said, "You're out." "Help you?" I asked, my voice sharp. "Where was your help when I mortgaged my house to save the company? Where was your help when I missed my son's graduation because I was here working while you were in Aspen? Where was your help when you were writing me out of the future I bled to build?" He flinched with every question, as though each word was a stone hurled at him. He buried his face in his hands. "I wasn't thinking. I got greedy. I thought I deserved more." I stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city lights. "You didn't just get greedy. You betrayed. You betrayed me. You betrayed the employees. You betrayed every client who trusted us. And now, you want me to clean up after you." I turned back to him. That part of my life is over." He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. For a moment, the old fire sparked in his eyes, but it burned out almost instantly. He sagged, broken again, and muttered, "You'll regret this." Then he walked out, his steps slow, dragging, like a man heading toward his own grave. I closed the door behind him and sat at my desk in silence. The office was quiet, but my chest felt lighter than it had in years. I had carried his weight for far too long. It was finally gone. In the weeks that followed, the court's orders became reality. His assets were liquidated, cars repossessed, properties seized. His name was stripped from every company document. The board recognized me as the sole decision-maker. His calls went unanswered, his emails ignored. The industry closed its doors to him. No one wanted to work with a man branded as a fraud. Rumors drifted in. He was renting a small apartment now, barely making ends meet. He tried pitching himself as a consultant, but word of his betrayal followed him everywhere. The arrogance that once opened doors now slammed them shut. He was toxic, untouchable. Meanwhile, the company began to heal. At first, there was fear, the kind that lingers after a storm. But as weeks turned into months, Confidence returned. Employees stopped whispering and started laughing again. Clients renewed contracts, new deals came in, and the office felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. I poured myself into rebuilding, but this time I led differently. No more secrets, no more arrogance. I opened the books, showed transparency, and shared credit. The people who had stood by me deserved it. They had carried this company when he would have sold it for a quick payday. Now, they were more than employees. They were family. One afternoon, Anna came into my office holding a stack of updated financials. She smiled as she handed them to me. "We're stronger than ever," she said. "You saved us." I looked around the office, at the hum of computers, the sound of laughter down the hall, the quiet energy of people who believed in what we were building. And for the first time in a long time, I believed too. But even in the peace, thought about him sometimes. Not with anger, not even with pity, just with clarity. He had been given the same chance I had, the same starting line, the same opportunities. But where I chose sacrifice, he chose shortcuts. Where I chose loyalty, he chose betrayal. And in the end, he got exactly what he had earned. Months later, I was leaving the office late when I passed the lobby and froze. Sitting on one of the benches was a familiar figure. He was thinner now, his suit cheap and wrinkled, his face hollow. He looked up, and for a moment, our eyes met. He didn't speak, he didn't plead. He just lowered his gaze to the floor, as if ashamed of even existing in the same space. I walked past him, my steps steady. I didn't need words. I didn't need revenge anymore. I already had it. His silence, his fall, his emptiness. That was justice enough. That night, when I locked the office doors and stepped into the cool night air, I whispered one final truth to myself. He tried to erase me. But in the end, I erased him. He sold our company behind my back. But in the end, I took back everything. If you like this story, subscribe and tell us your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next one, click on the box on the screen.